Hi, and welcome to What's Up. I'm John Peterson from the Arlington Institute, and it's nice to have you with us. It's a great day here in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, to get together with friends and talk about, whatever's on our minds. And that friend today is, of course, Gregg Braden. Hello, my friend. How are you?
John, hello. It's good to see you, and I'm excited to have this conversation.
Yeah,
I'm going to be in your part of the world here at the end of the month, and we're going to take
31st.
this.
Yeah,
Yeah, we'll
31st
take
of
it to a
May.
deeper level. Yeah, but I'm excited to get together with you and talk about all the new emerging discoveries.
Yeah, amazing, kind of interesting things that are going on. So what's up? What have you been thinking about?
Well, John, you and I have had a number of conversations about what some people are calling the new human or the
Yeah,
emerging human. One of the things I've found when I'm with a live audience, there's a disconnect. A lot of people say, what's that even mean? I mean, what's going to
right.
be so different from where we are right now? Because so many of the discoveries, they're peer reviewed. I mean, this isn't like make believe. It's peer reviewed science, but they're relegated to these very obscure technical journals. Very few people see them. Even the professionals are not aware of this. I'll just give you an example. I was doing an event based on the new book, Pure Human. And it was here in New Mexico about 3 weeks ago. And we had cardiac surgeons who were in the audience. And when I began speaking about the 40,000 specialized cells, the sensory neurites, and the neural network discovered in the heart that feels, thinks, and remembers
Right.
independently the cranial brain, they came up to me during the break and said, "How come we don't know about this? Why aren't we taught this kind of information?" So that was just one example. So there are a number of studies that have been done recently that are really showing how extraordinary we are. And when people ask me the question, what could possibly change and what does a new human really mean? Let me just share a couple of these studies if you're okay with that.
Oh
Can I roll
yeah,
into a
please.
couple of them
Yeah,
here?
sure.
One of the studies that was done, well, let me just back up. Our young people today are being conditioned to essentially place on a godlike status, a computer chip and artificial intelligence. Young people are being taught they're a flawed form of life. They need something outside of themselves to be the best version of themselves. And of course, that's technology. So when I share with them uh, the capacities of a human neuron, for example. So we look at a computer chip. Are they fast? Absolutely. Are they efficient? Absolutely. No doubt about it. Are they scalable? And this is where it gets really interesting because a computer chip is only scalable. It's limited by the physics of the
Right.
stuff that it's made of. So if it's a silicon chip, the information can only flow between those atoms at a
Yeah,
certain
right.
rate. There is something called Moore's Law that is telling us how quickly we are approaching the limits of what our hard technology will allow us to do. So, are they scalable? No. Fast, efficient? Yes. Scalable? No. Now, you look at a human neuron. Is it fast? It is. Is it efficient? It is. Is it scalable? What is the high end? And this is where it gets really interesting because the answer is we don't know. Every time we push a human neuron or we push the brain to the boundary of what we think is a limit, we are
Yeah.
so sophisticated, John. What we do is our biology morphs and adapts
Yeah, right, right.
to that new condition, opening up a whole new vista of potential. And we know this because even back, as late as the 80s and the 90s, we were taught that there were just four primary brain states and that the brain couldn't process beyond
Yeah.
about 40 hertz, 40 cycles per second. And then Tibetan monks began showing us under certain conscious conditions that they initiated on demand at will. They could double that 40 to 80 hertz and then
Yeah.
80 to 100 hertz. And then they had a new brain state called the gamma brain state. And
Right,
then
right,
they
right.
doubled that to the hyper gamma brain state. But they even went to the other end. They were able to slow their brain state to less than one cycle per second in a new brain state called the epsilon brain state, all,
Mm.
all to say that we don't know what the upper limit is because every time we approach a limit, we morph and adapt. And that's one perspective. The Salk Institute in Northern California did a fascinating study just 2 years ago. And they compared the human brain to a microprocessor. Now, a lot of people say, well, how can you make that
Yeah.
comparison? Well, what they said was that the synapse in the human brain is the
Right.
equivalent of the transistors on the microprocessor.
Right.
And what they found was the bottom line to this study, that the human brain is 100-fold more efficient, not faster, but more efficient than the best microprocessor that we have available today. Now, of course, all that may change when the chips become quantum chips,
Yeah.
but we are also working on those quantum principles, and
Sure.
those chips are now coming closer to approximating the way the brain actually works. All to say that the new human, whatever that means, the science is showing us that there is this huge unrealized potential that the conditions of the world are pushing us into if we choose to embrace that potential.
Well, that's interesting because, your brain doesn't change size as you learn things.
Yeah.
It reconfigures itself internally in whatever way it does, more connections, synapses, whatever it turns out to be. But but you don't get physical expansion around the same thing. And that is interesting to me
Yeah.
because, as you know, we're working with Mike Adams on his new ENIC AI machine. And we have contributed, the Arlington Institute has contributed, 30,000 scanned books to put into this thing. And Mike explained to me that the AI works like the human brain. That is to say, it doesn't get any bigger when when it's exposed to all of these learning things. So much it just generates the internal connections in a more complex kind of way. So much so that in his case, he's trying to build an alternative to Chat GPT and all the rest of them that really understands our world and how it works, and alternative health, alternative energy, metaphysics, whatever. And he has found a source of, if I remember right, 43 million books that are all digitized. And that, in fact, in the same kind of laptops, it'll run on a laptop, but what it has is the aggregated, the integrated kind of aspects of all of that information, all in the same kind of package, if you will, that it's always been before. And so that it's interesting to me that you mentioned this in terms of the human, because that allows for this extraordinary kind of expansion in awareness and so on. And we've got the equipment already to do that.
Yeah. Well, John, it's interesting that you mentioned the size of the human brain. I remember when I was a kid, Einstein had just passed.
Yeah,
And
right.
they when they buried his body, they kept his brain. They preserved his brain because they wanted to see what was different.
Yeah,
Where did E equals MC2 come from?
yeah,
MC squared. And what they did was they freeze dried his brain and they thin sliced it to see what made it different. And what they found is it didn't look different than most typical brains, with one exception. And this was really fascinating to me. It had more folds
oh
than
yeah,
than an average human brain. Well, if you take those folds and you stretch them out, you've got surface area, and that
sure,
surface area is the neurons. More neurons creating more surface area that create a greater neural network. And I think this is one of the mysteries when anthropologists were looking at some of our predecessors, Cro-Magnon, for example.
yeah,
We have smaller brains than they do. And they said, well, how could we have a smaller brain if we're supposedly more intelligent? Well, this is the answer. It's not the physical size, but it's the number of folds within that size. we tend to increase those folds. So the point of what the studies are showing is that there is potential, and there is another area of study that is adding to this. When the human genome was mapped back in the year 2000 is when it was announced. There was kind of a false assumption that now we've got a map of the entire human genome. Well, all we mapped was the part of the genome that codes for proteins. That happens to be only 2% of the entire genome. So here's the arrogance of the science. They said, well, the rest of it is junk DNA. We don't need it anymore. And now what they're finding is that it's not junk DNA. The DNA that doesn't do the programming actually influences the DNA that does do the programming, and that 98%. It's kind of like when physicists look at the universe, 4% of the universe is physical matter, 96% they call dark matter or dark energy.
Yeah, I know.
They're applying the same terms. 2% of the DNA is coding DNA. 98%, they're actually saying now we don't know what it's for.
They got a hole that's shaped so that they call dark matter that they're trying to fill up with ideas. They don't know. What that. So there's something really interesting about your DNA before you go on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And that is David Martin, who you know, who comes here to Transition Talks years ago. David said, I think that the intelligence and the complexity in DNA really has to do with how it's folded together and how it transmits. And you're talking about a similar kind of idea in terms of the surface area or the adjacencies or the other kind of things associated with the brain of Einstein. So it could, there might be a whole other dimension here in terms of how DNA functions that is not just this kind of linear up and down the spiral, but again, how the package.
Well, it is, but where this gets really, really interesting, and for me, really exciting and really good news. So many of the things that we talk about are changes that are not welcome and can be frightening.
Right.
This is really good news because what the evidence now suggests is that what's happening in that what's called dark DNA is influencing the 2% we can see, but it's not doing it in a vacuum, is that we are actually driving what's happening in that dark DNA, and we're doing it through the principles, the triggers that we now call epigenetic triggers. So the epi means above genetics. So it's above it. It means that there's not a fixed program, that the program is dynamic and it morphs, and that we have direct. If I were a computer programmer right now, as I used to be, I would say we have right access to that dark DNA in terms of what it means in our bodies. That covers everything from extraordinary potentials of accessing telepathy on an everyday basis, at will, on demand, possibly remote viewing if that's where you want to take it. But deep states of intuition, empathy, sympathy, compassion, deep states of healing, all are the product, the outcome of what's happening in the genome, and the instructions appear to be coming from part of the genome that we're only beginning to understand, not the part that was mapped. And we appear to have peripherally, at least, direct access to what's happening. And this I think is, as the world is changing and we are threatened biologically through things like 5G and 6G and toxins sprayed in the air and in the environment, we cannot possibly, it's like whack-a-mole. You stop one here and you got another one here. You make yourself crazy doing that. Our best bet is to become the best version of ourselves, to realize, perhaps for the first time in a very long time, the deep truth of what it means to be human, pure human, not an augmented human through technology. Because what the studies are showing, John, and this is a big statement, in many cases, we not only meet, but we exceed the capacity of the very technology that
Oh,
we're
of
being
course.
asked to replace our bodies with.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
It's
Yeah.
right there. So you talk a lot about the new human. I talk about the new human, and all the things happening in the world that may look frightening to us may be the evolutionary forces that are driving us to awaken the deep truth of who we really are. The key is, will we accept our humanness before we give it away to the technology? Will we accept the potential of our humanness before we trade it for the speed and efficiency of AI or a computer chip in the body? People ask me all the time, should I be afraid of 5G? Should I be afraid of 6G? And the answer is, it's about how you perceive your relationship to yourself. Are there forces? 5G, can it negatively impact cells? Absolutely. We are human, however. And that means that when we are given those kinds of conditions, we have the ability to transcend those conditions. Thought, feeling, emotion, breath, focus, nutrition, and movement. There are nutritional supplements from Mother Nature, such as bromelain, such as NAC, that break down and degrade graphene, for example, that is the toxin in so much of what we're seeing in the world today. You don't have to know that. What you're doing is you're eating really clean, healthy, organic, to the degree that we can get it, kinds of foods that will naturally degrade those toxins that we find pervasive in our environment right now.
Interestingly enough, the model that we want to build of this new world, some people say, well, it's so complex and everything. No, 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 no. You're not going to duplicate reality down to the most granular level. What we're trying to do, if you could get a basic kind of architecture, a high level kind of architecture, think of a big building and just the structural pieces that when they're building the building that are kind of hold it together and the cross members and so on. If you could do that for what a new world would be like, and what are the component parts, how does technology and transportation and education and whatever all kind of fit together in the framework of a new set of values and ideas and objectives and assumptions, then once you get that, then all the people who worked on it then start filling it all in, you know.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, this is it, John. We already have all the technology that we need to alleviate the suffering, to feed every
Yeah.
mouth, to heal every body. It's the thinking, and this is maybe the hardest part. It's the way that we have been taught to think about ourselves and what we've accepted to be true. When that changes, that is reflected in the way the technology is applied.
Yeah.
When we see a
Yeah.
world
Yeah.
based on, yeah, we see a world based on competition and lack, then the technology is going to be about hoarding resources. And when we see a world that is just the opposite of that, based on cooperation and mutual aid, then the technology is used to support that. So the tech isn't good, bad, right, or wrong.
Yeah.
It's the thinking, and I think that is probably the greatest task, John, is giving people the reason to think of themselves differently and to
Yeah.
accept
Yeah.
what it is they discover, to accept it into their lives.
Yeah, you
Uh,
need to present these alternatives so that they can. It's in my business, it's called scenario. You say it could be this or it could be that or it could be that. But once you do that, you kind of seed the mind space, and you can't not forget it once you've seen it. And so now it becomes the possibility for that you can aggregate around the new ideas.
Yeah, well, the potential. So right now we're talking about a mind shift within a generation that's already accepted a different way of thinking. Typically, what happens is a new generation is indoctrinated into a new
Yeah,
way, and it's easier for them. For people that are already anchored into another way of thinking,
yeah.
it takes trust and it takes work to turn that around.
Yeah, we don't have time. We
I
don't
know
have the
that.
time. We don't have generations to turn over and Neil Howe kind of terms. That this has got to happen in a hurry. So that's something we can talk about next time when we get
All right.
together, I'm sure. Well, thank you. Always Always fun to talk to you, my friend. So, What's Up is one of the programs of the Arlington Institute. And we're happy to have all of you who are viewers and follow us when we get together every couple of weeks to do this. As should be obvious, this is unscripted and we have no idea what we're going to talk about, but it always kind of turns out to be fun and interesting. And so we hope you'll come back again. And you can find out about more of what we do here at the Arlington Institute at arlingtoninstitute.org. And everything that we try to do is all about building this transition, facilitating the transition to this new world. So thanks so much. And we'll be back. We do this every 2 weeks, and send along your comments and like us and share us and all of those kinds of things as well, because that all helps. So thank you, Greg. Nice to
Thank
be
you,
with
John, for a stimulating conversation. I'm inspired right now, and I look forward to being at the Arlington Institute the end of May 2025. I'm going to be there, May 31st.
31st of May. Yeah. So
All right.
it'll
Thanks
be
so
fun.
much. Take care.
Yeah. Take care. Bye.